We've got Jared, the Killa Gorilla Cannonier, coming back, trying to claim one more title shot. He says he's got one more in him. And meanwhile, you got on the other side, Nassourdine Imavov, an emerging contender in this middleweight division, one of the best prospects right now in French MMA. And you might be saying to yourself, the Russian sniper is a French MMA prospect. Yes, he is training in France. He has gotten a lot of work there, but the Russian sniper, he's a guy that has an ability to go out there and find his shots on the feet. He's an excellent striker, but he's also known for, holding his own on the mat, especially recently. We saw that fight with Roman Dolidze, known for his ground game, known for guard pulling, known for looking for his submission offense, tore the knee of Phil Hawes apart, was able to submit several opponents, put people in bad positions. Jack Hermanson, he was able to wrap up in the grappling as well. But you saw that this guy, Nassourdine Imavov, was able to roll with him, was able to flow with him, was able to see what he was doing on the mat and move around him in his position. So I thought that we saw a lot of promising improvements from Nassourdine Imavov. Now, on the danger factor for this guy, he's coming in here as a favorite, despite the fact that one time over 5 rounds, he did not look so hot against Sean Strickland, former champion, guy who's coming off a big win at UFC 302 over the weekend. And we know that Nassourdine Imavov, was kind of put into a short notice opportunity there. We're going to pull up Tapology, make sure that we speak clearly about the history. But Nassourdine Imavov essentially has a schedule bout. He takes on Sean Strickland, 5-round booking. And Sean Strickland comes in off the couch, but he was still a very quality fighter at the time. I thought that Nassourdine was going to get the job done there. I thought he could knock out a guy like Sean Strickland because he's got precise striking, but he slowed down there. He did not like the pressure. And I think that that's something to keep in the back of our mind as a potential red flag for this guy. Do you want to give him a little bit of a pass? Because it was a, weigh-in where Sean Strickland got to come in heavy, where he didn't have to cut much weight. He was able to, put a little bit more heft and impact behind his shots. If you look at the record of Sean Strickland, when he fights catch weight fights and, fights up a weight class, things like that, he fought at 170 at one point in his career, but at 195-pound catch weight, he finished Brendan Allen, who's like a top 10 guy in the division. So I just think you got to put a little credit on Sean Strickland's name. When he's allowed to walk into these fights with a little more weight on him, he's had a little bit more success hurting guys, landing impactful shots. And that fight with Nassourdine Imavov, Imavov didn't shell up and just get finished there, but he didn't really have enough offense to offer. And Strickland, as we know, can be a volume machine for 5 full rounds. So he's made a couple of guys look bad now. He did it to Israel Adesanya. He did it to Paulo Costa. I would say he did it to Nassourdine Imavov as well, where Sean Strickland walks him down, puts some pressure on him, stays in their face. Meanwhile, you compare that to Jared Cannonier's fight with Sean Strickland. Jared Cannonier went out there. He was walking him down. He was getting in his face. He landed a ton of hard low kicks that really got the respect of Sean. And Sean would admit that wasn't his best performance. Sean would admit, he didn't fight that fight how he wants to approach his fights, where he's coming out, getting in somebody's face, walking him down. He really had to pick his shots there. He fought a little bit on the back foot. He had a couple of times where he would be leaning back, all of his weight backwards over his haunches. And so Jared wasn't always connecting with the biggest shots and knocking him off his feet, but he landed a ton of strikes in that fight. And he landed a lot of strikes as well in his subsequent fight against Marvin Vettori. So we're seeing that despite being a little bit older and a little bit longer in the tooth, Jared Cannonier's made improvements over the course of his career. I think the most obvious sign of a guy finding his optimal weight class, this guy, Jared Cannonier, was very average in the heavyweight division. He was very suboptimal in the 205-pound weight class. But at 185, you see his physicality. He's an imposing guy. He's built like a brick of cement. He's just very strong physically. It's not easy to move this guy around or horse him around. And I think that when you're looking at a guy like Jared Cannonier, the problems I have are manifold. It's not because he's not a great fighter. That's obvious, right? It's not because he hasn't put great tape together. It's not because he hasn't been a very solid out throughout his career. But my problem, coming into this fight is, number one, you've got Jared Cannonier coming off of surgery. I don't love that in terms of a guy who's at this point in his career, 40 years of age, coming off of surgery, coming off a little bit of a layoff as well. That doesn't bode well typically. Here's the other thing. We're talking about a weight class at 185 pounds where the knockout rate is pretty serious, right? Guys can get clipped, they can get hurt. In main events this year, I know it hasn't been going that way, right? Middleweight main events have been flying over. They've been going the decision. I understand that. But I do think that that is always something that's due for a little bit of regression, right? If a trend line, if a stat line is running out in one direction, in a really overwhelming way, it is due for correction. It doesn't mean it's going to happen at any one point. There's a lot of randomness involved, but I think that when you look at a guy who's over 38 years of age, the book Fightnomics tells us that's when the skyrocketing happens for the knockout loss rate, right? Guys over 38 years of age in the UFC just get knocked out way more frequently than anybody else in the organization, if you look at the raw data. And so when I'm looking at this fight, I say to myself, Jared Cannonier, very quality fighter, very skilled, but is he going to be more likely to get knocked out at 40 years of age coming off of surgery than at any other point in his career? I think just based on logic, we'd all have to say yes, right? Like it's the most likely he's ever been to be knocked out in one of these fights. Then let's go back and examine the record of Jared Cannonier because he's been getting clipped and hurt in a lot of these fights, even fights that he's winning. Marvin Vettori kind of buzzed him in the opening exchanges, and then Jared put an absolute legendary beatdown on him over the course of 5 rounds. You look at the Strickland fight, back and forth fight, both guys landed, but I don't think Jared got hit with anything super overwhelming in that fight. The Israel Adesanya fight, again, that was a fight that was a little bit tepid in terms of the pace. There wasn't as much volume. There wasn't as much action there. But you definitely saw that Israel was the one who was getting off the better shots in that fight. Derek Brunson, I had a huge bet on Jared Cannonier because I thought he was more durable. I thought he had better cardio. I thought that he had knockout ability. I thought that he was going to be able to resist the wrestling of Derek Brunson. And I really respect Derek Brunson. I made a lot of money betting on him. Biggest prop hit that I can remember, one of my favorite bets of all time, Derek Brunson by sub plus 2,900 against Darren Till. Took him down, took his back, rear naked choked his ass. But when you look, this guy, Jared Cannonier, he's gone out there and put on solid fights, but that Derek Brunson fight, he did make me sweat it a little bit. He did get buzzed in that early round. Derek Brunson was having a lot of success. Blonde Brunson came to play that night, but Jared Cannonier, you saw how that fight ended. Gets on top of him, absolutely brutal elbows. The corner threw in the towel. The referee intervened. It was just a brutal beatdown by the Killa Gorilla in the second round. But again, we saw that instance of him getting hurt, getting buzzed there. He kind of beat up Kelvin Gastelum really bad. Dropped Kelvin in that fight as well. Somewhat competitive on the minutes. Robert Whittaker did hurt him very bad in the third round. Also, I think he broke his arm in that fight. So you've seen a pattern of this guy going out there and kind of getting hurt in some of these fights, getting injured in some of these fights, not putting on an optimal performance and game plan against Adesanya. I thought that Adesanya was a beatable opponent. We saw against Sean Strickland, that's very true, right? And we saw against Jared and Sean, they're kind of on the same level. So what happened that night when he took on Izzy? He kind of just didn't have it that night. He kind of put on a stinker of a performance in a big spot and a big opportunity. And now his back is against the wall here in terms of needing a big spot and a big opportunity. If he goes out there and gets a win, it doesn't really necessarily put him next in line, especially just a win, in tepid fashion over a guy like Imavov. That's not going to move him up the chain. Whereas if he can go out there and get a dominant win, an explosive win, maybe that puts Jared's name back into title conversations. But right now, I don't think people are looking at Jared Cannonier and saying, hey, I need to see this guy, in huge title fights and big opportunities. I think more so they're happy to see him in these more casual, fight night main event settings. And he's obviously a very solid fighter. He's earned his keep, right? He's beaten a lot of quality guys. He hasn't lost anybody that's not a quality fighter in recent years. But you just start to wonder, where is the rubber going to meet the road for Jared at his age with the amount of physical strain he puts on his body? But he's training out of a great camp in the lab. He's a guy that puts in a lot of work. Seems like he's working with a bunch of contemporaries, guys on this card. They're all trying to peak together. Guys like Julian Marquez, other guys that are working together in this middleweight division. So it seems to me like Jared's going to go out there and put on a great effort, and he's going to go out there ready to compete. but I don't know if his speed is going to be able to keep up with Imavov. I think Imavov is very sharp with his punches. I think he's fast. I think he can move around with his footwork. I wonder what the leg kicks of Jared Cannonier will be able to accomplish here. I think that's going to be a tool he's going to look to rely on. But again, if you're coming off of a surgical repair of your own leg, how comfortable are you going to be throwing that kick? How comfortable are you going to be trying to set down with 100% power on your low kicks? That's a question for me. If I was on the Cannonier side, I'd almost want to see like 2 minutes and 30 seconds of this fight, kind of see how he's going out there and feeling it out, see if he's out there throwing calf kicks and getting after it, or if he's being a little bit tepid. If it looks more like the Adesanya fight, he's kind of picking his spots. He's, hustling along the fence line, maybe trying to push this guy into the fence and hold on to him. But when I'm looking at a guy like Imavov, I thought that the performance last time against Dolidze, Dolidze is a solid fighter, right? He's dangerous in all positions, but the fundamentals weren't really there. And the speed was huge, right? The gap was massive. And so you just saw that Dolidze was fighting from behind all night and chasing after it. And he was getting hurt. He got kicked in the head really hard. There was a few times I thought he was going to get finished there, and he just toughed it out, man. The Georgian guys, they're very, very tough. I think Jared is a very tough guy as well, but we've seen him get clipped before, right? We have examples of it happening. It hasn't happened in this middleweight division, but I commend you to watch the Robert Whittaker fight. Super back and forth, fun fight. Both guys had big moments there, but what we definitely saw is that Jared Cannonier could have been, clipped and finished in that fight. And then you also saw he could have clipped and finished Robert Whittaker. So he's got power. But Dominic Reyes, guy who we're going to be talking about on this card, finished him with an uppercut, right? Caught him coming in, dropped him really bad. That was up at 205 pounds. Sean Jordan put him away in brutal fashion back in 2015 in the heavyweight division. And so I don't say that to say one-to-one comparison, Nassourdine Imavov equals Sean Jordan. It's more so to say, hey, Jared Cannonier, over the course of his career, he has been hurt before, he's been clipped before, and so it always is something that we want to keep in the back of our mind at 40 years of age, going in there to fight these young killers who are still very aggressive, who are still ready to get after it. And I think that this is a spot where Imavov has a lot to prove, right? He's stepping into this fight still at just 28 years of age, right? He's on the right side of 30. We've got a guy in Jared Cannonier on the wrong side of 40. So I don't want to make too much of the age. I don't want to overthink that. But when you couple that with the fact that he's coming off the surgery, that's something I don't love to see. Then we look at the topology, right? 70% of voters are on Cannonier. Yet we're seeing basically the bookmakers hanging him at plus 105. They're tempting you to come in and play that side. So I just want to refer now real quick over to our friends at Fight Numbers. So as we look at the best available odds screen, they've got plus 108 over at Betfair listed right here as the best money line price on Jared Cannonier as the underdog. Meanwhile, Nassourdine Imavov, we're looking at the best available price of minus 120 over at BetMGM. So I think that this is a fight where if I had to make a play right now, I would lean towards this fight not going the distance. When I'm looking at it, I know we've had a bunch of these main events go, but here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking, number one, Jared Cannonier, he says it's not enough for me to go out there and get the win. I need to go out there and put on a great performance. If you want to put on a great performance and you're Jared Cannonier, I think you're going to come out looking for the finish, right? We saw that Marvin Vettori's got a brick for a head. He was able to take an insane amount of damage in that fight. But Jared Cannonier was fucking him up, and he landed a ton of volume. He landed a ton of damage. I don't know that people would have been aggrieved if that fight had been stopped at certain points. Like, it seemed like it was getting very violent, and he was willing to keep pushing and breaking him down there. So I'm thinking about this fight and saying, man, I think Jared's going to come out like a house on fire. I think he's going to try and get the finish. And I think that the worry for a guy like Cannonier is what happens if this fight gets extended and he starts getting into bad positions. Number one, Nassourdine Imavov's going to fire off the jab. I think he's going to try and keep him at a distance. I think he's going to try and use his powerful shots. He's also got those dangerous kicks to the body, to the head. He could teep a little bit. I think that Imavov is going to try and keep up a wide variety of offense, but he's also got a pretty heavy pressure on top. We've seen him use the takedowns to alleviate pressure when guys want to get in his face, when they want to get a hold of him. And in some of these fights, Imavov's been taking on, quality grapplers like a Roman Tolidze, a very dangerous guy on the mat that you maybe don't want to get into contentious exchanges, on the grappling front. So I thought we saw Imavov being very defensive in those positions. But if you look in the past, the Joaquin Buckley fight, he was able to get a few takedowns there. He was able to get on top. He was able to threaten some positions in that fight. Edmund Shabazian, I bet Nassourdine Imavov at a pick'em in that fight with Edmund Shabazian. So that's why I don't want to bet on, bet the same price essentially to fade a guy like Jared Cannonier when I could have faded Edmund Shabazian at the same price. For me, that was such a great bet because Edmund, we know, only has a round and a half of cardio. And so Imavov was on top of him and just punishing him with elbows. I do think that Imavov has excellent ground and pound. He knows how to make people tired, make people feel his weight from on top. And I do think that's something that we want to keep in the back of our mind because we've seen him do that, I believe, regionally as well. When you look, he's a guy that's proven very difficult to finish. He hasn't been finished, I'm talking about Imavov, since his first professional fight, and that was via guillotine choke. So he's been put in danger a handful of times, but he's mostly done a good job of imposing his will and his skill set on his opponents. I actually bet him all the way back against Phil Hawes in his second UFC fight. It was a majority decision, could have went either way. He got out wrestled and pushed against the fence there. So for me, the one danger factor with laying chalk here is we have seen that Jared Cannonier at his best, right? Assuming that he's a similar level to what we've seen in the past, he can push a 5-round pace and he can press people into the fence, kind of be negative sometimes in his style. That's how Imavov has been neutralized at times. Phil Hawes was able to push him into the fence, lean on him. And I think that what we have to acknowledge is a guy like Phil Hawes is a pretty chinny fighter. He's a guy that's been clipped, hurt by a lot of his subsequent opponents. And so, I don't want to overread that, but Imavov wasn't able to put him away there. He was able to hurt him. He was able to land some decent shots, but Phil was able to use that strength, that physicality to push him against the fence. We're in a big octagon here. We're at a live crowd. So I think that unlike some of these Apex events for Cannonier, this is a little bit more akin to fighting Adesanya, right? It's like in front of a big crowd, big opportunity. He's gone out there and silenced big crowds before. Make no mistake. We absolutely saw that when he beat Jack Hermanson. But I think Jack Hermanson was intimidated by a guy like Jared Cannonier. And if we go through Jared's resume, he's done very well in this middleweight division. Make no mistake, 10-6 record overall in the UFC. But Marvin Vettori, not a very dangerous guy, in terms of his own strikes. He's basically a point fighter at this point of his career. He's finished, I think, 2 guys. I think they were both rear naked chokes against really low-level fighters. Then the Sean Strickland fight was a split decision. I really think it could have went either way. I bet Sean Strickland at plus money that night. I thought he won when the fight was over, but I also wasn't crying robbery. I'm not going to cry robbery now. Thought it was a close fight. Then I think it's a close fight now. Then the Adesanya fight, I bet Jared against Adesanya, and I was really disappointed with his output, with his performance, with his game plan. Then you look at the Derek Brunson fight, made me sweat more than I hoped to. The Kelvin Gastelum fight, he got the win, but I wasn't altogether extremely impressed, except by his power in that fight. He dropped a tough guy in Kelvin Gastelum. So again, for me, the upside with a guy like Cannonier, maybe he could surprise you, go out there, find a knockout. Get after it early. Maybe he's still got that same explosivity, but I think coming off the knee surgery, I think the fact that he's over 40 years of age, fighting a young guy who's still hungry, who's a killer, I'm going to lean towards the Imavov side here on my first look, but I'm going to continue to do my research and my due diligence. What we're going to do is bets and banter this week. I want to just address the chat. A couple people have asked, what's the deal with bets and banter? For this week, guys, we're going to push bets and banter to Friday. My birthday's this week. I've had a lot going on, in my personal life this week. So working on a bunch of things for you guys, but trying to get a great guest lined up. Believe my guy Rich is busy this week. So we got a lot of great things, in the future, including that episode of Bets and Banter, but it's probably not going to be today. Later on, it's going to be tomorrow. So stay tuned for that announcement. Stay tuned for that link. It will be up shortly. Make sure you hit the bell for notifications if you want to see every time we go live here on this channel. And we're going to have lots of great fight content, on this card and every card moving forward, because that's what we do around here, talking about the UFC. So I think that when we're looking at this main event, prefer the total to a side. I think that the sides are a little bit volatile here, but if I'm pressed to make a pick, I'm going to lean with Nassourdine Imavov. So if you guys wanted to hop on fight numbers, that's where I was looking at the odds screen before. Really like what those guys are doing. Also, they've been crushing it in terms of their betting results. I didn't have the best UFC 302 out there, but I wanted to say they had a pretty good event themselves. A great group of guys over there. John Kelly, really reputable guy, service member. And I just believe in what he's doing. I believe in the product. Helps me with my capping. So if you guys want to check that out, the site that I was looking at before, and it's up behind me right here, fight numbers, promo code Liam. It's all in the description box down below. If you're serious about betting on MMA, it's a resource that will help you. If not, no sweat.